Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem, a postmortem of my Blitz game number 490. I had the black pieces, my opponent played e4 and I went with the Sicilian. And now in this position he played knight c3, which is the second most common move here. The most common move is knight f3, usually followed by d4, known as the open Sicilian. But what we get in this game is a closed Sicilian. Now knight c3 has a couple of ideas. One is to possibly introduce the Grand Prix attack. The Grand Prix attack is the move f4, but if you play f4 immediately, the reply d5 is pretty good. So this gives black a decent game. So as a refinement, the move knight to c3 prevents the move d5, and then f4 can be played later to get the Grand Prix attack. So I play knight c6, the main move here. This is also a flexible response. It's ready to meet the Grand Prix attack and also other replies. He goes for a different setup. You see f4, the Grand Prix attack is like the fifth choice here, although it's a pretty popular way to play in my experience. Knight f3, just continuing, is a way to go back into the open Sicilian. So this knight to c3 move is a very flexible move that can introduce a lot of different systems. He goes for the second choice here, which is g3, the kingside fianchetto. And I'm not so familiar with this. Apparently the main response here is g6, with just setting up a symmetrical fianchetto. It's not a symmetrical system because the center is asymmetrical, but you can set up some symmetry on the king side. Anyway, I went with e6, which is a plan you often follow against the Grand Prix attack. And he still has ideas of playing f4 here potentially, but he's going to play a little more slowly and get in this move bishop g2 first. Anyway, he goes knight to e2, keeping this diagonal free for his bishop, so when his bishop comes out here it'll be effective. Also, there's no pressure, cancel that. There's no pressure on this pawn just yet. I haven't developed my knight to f6, which is probably what I should do next. Knight f6, you see, is the top choice. Knight to e7, maybe not the best move here, but not too awful. But it does give some edge to white. So knight f6, the more accurate way to play. He goes bishop g2. He's got a little more center control here, and I play d5 here to try and contest that. That was the idea of the knight to e7, was support e5 without having to worry about this pawn push, to support d5 without having to worry about the pawn push to e5. Let's see, we're out of the book here. So I went ahead and played d5, and this is playable, but I have to be careful. Right here, I need to take back with the knight, and after I take back with the pawn, I'm actually in a bit of trouble. Somehow I've fallen behind in development with my extra pawn moves here, and let's just show how the game goes. Well, first of all, knight takes d5. If he exchanges off the knight, which is the recommended move from the chess engine, get the best play, has some pressure on the d-pawn, I can push on with d4 here and get a playable game apparently. So that's the way for me to try and stay in the game. After I play e takes d5, I guess I'm not so used to this fianchetto setup. There's a lot of pressure immediately on the d5 point, and he starts out with a really good move here. He plays d4 here, which prevents me from advancing that pawn, so it sort of guarantees this pawn is going to stay under fire. There's a number of choices here, but all of them leave white with a significant edge here. I decided to go for the isolated queen's pawn position, which is usually not too bad. I'm not afraid of playing these positions. Usually the side with the isolated queen's pawn has a little more space and a little bit easier development. But you see that actually white is quite well developed here, and his pieces are placed very logically. Let's see. My best try here is to actually exchange, but you can see, well, let's follow the computer line. You can see how much of an advantage white already has. So if I trade, which I didn't play, he takes, and then bishop to e6 to defend this pawn. He's already got three pieces attacking it, so I need to hold on to that. Then he can just castle, and this is already looking kind of uncomfortable here. Let's see, I can play knight c6 to kick his queen. The queen can go to a4, just drop back to d3, and he just has a tremendous lead in development. as well as in the long run he has pressure against the isolated queen's pawn. So he's not winning material immediately, but pretty good edge for white out of the opening. So good opening result, and it started with this move knight e7 and then not realizing how fragile the d5 square was going to be for me. So those two mistakes got me in trouble. I continue with the g6 here. He castles. And I go bishop g7. So if you notice that actually that castling move let me off the hook. Right here he could just outright win a pawn with the move bishop to g5, pinning this knight. And now this pawn here is under defended, and I don't have any really good way to defend it. The chess engine is saying just play bishop g7 and let him take the pawn, and that's the best I can do. Just I need to develop it and get my king castled. So I'm already down a pawn with best place. I did mess up the opening. He lets me off the hook with castling. And then I go bishop g7, and now the edge is not so great. We get into more of a typical kind of isolated queen's pawn position. He goes bishop e3. I castle, knight c e2, reinforcing this knight, maybe preparing to move the c pawn forward. I go bishop to d7. I want to get a rook on the c file. Yeah, he goes c3. Very common idea. It defends that pawn against pressure on the c file, and it also stops my d pawn from moving forward. So that this pawn will stay back here on d5, and he can just mount up the pressure on it. So I go rook c8, and he plays queen to b3 here, hitting my b pawn. I go knight to f5. So all this is pretty typical play. You'll see white has the slight edge here, but knight takes f5 was a mistake. I let go of the d pawn, not realizing it. And let's see, it would be a little more accurate for him to exchange off this knight here first. Yeah, it's what happens when you're playing a new system. You're not aware of everything that's going on in it sometimes. You don't have that long familiarity of seeing these patterns over and over again. Yeah, so I wasn't conscious of how weak my d-pawn was once again. So he can just grab the pawn, and he does, although the engine says it would be better to trade off my knight first. But anyway, he takes. And from here on, he's just a pawn up. And there's not too much I can do about it. Let's see, it would be a little better to take on e3. I wondered about this. If I grab his bishop, I can isolate his e-pawn and maybe get some pressure on it. But at the same time, it opens up an f-file for his rook, and he maybe gets counterattacking chances. So this is a little tough decision for me. I decided to take on d4 instead, and so we get these exchanges. And let's see, he played knight takes. Knight takes. And now I realized, I thought maybe I would get some pressure on an isolated pawns here, but now I realized, I've got a weakness on my b pawn that I have to deal with. So let's see, he plays here, and I throw in the move bishop to c6 to chase his queen away and to protect my b pawn. But he can just trade up the queen. Cancel that. I took with the f rook. Let's see, he grabbed here on g7. And, and he continued taking on c6. In some cases, it may have been better for white to keep a little more material on, but he went straight for the rook and pawn endgame. So I think if we back up, there were better moves here. Queen takes d8 was good, rook takes d8. Bishop takes g7. Yeah, so at this point, he should just keep the material and win with his extra pawn. But going into a rook and pawn endgame is a bit dicey because rook and pawn endgames are often drawish, and in fact there were drawing chances in this game. So by continuing to simplify at this point, he's actually making a mistake. In fact, bishop takes a7. He could actually just pick up another pawn here and have a two-pawn advantage. That would make the endgame very secure. But even bishop to e3 and just keeping the bishops on is given as as an advantage by the chess engine compared to this further exchange. It just simplifies a little too much. He needs to keep a little more force on the board until he's got for sure a winning advantage. So after the bishops come off, we're down to a rook and pawn endgame, and even trades off one pair of rooks. So I have good prospects here. Let's see, I double the rooks, and he trades. The thing is, And my king is in a reasonable position relative to his king. I mean, he has no advantage in king position. My rook actually is more active, and I don't have any particular pawn weaknesses. Neither does he. I mean, both sides have good pawn structures, but well, it's his turn to move. He goes rook to b1. You know, I'm already preparing to come in and attack. So just the activity of my rook is probably enough to hold this endgame. Now, this is going to be a long video if I go over the blow by blow at this point. So I'm going to just kind of fast forward through these moves and reach a couple of critical points. So let's just play through the moves. You'll see it stays in the range. As long as this number doesn't really climb too far, I probably still have a draw in hand at this point. And I keep it in hand until move 42 here. So let's just keep going. Or probably a little more accurate ways to play. But you see how my active rook is just keeping him tied down a little bit. Even now with his rook getting active, these trades are not a problem for me. And let's see, right there, rook f2. This was a mistake. Although it's a mistake just because of one particular reason. It's not a mistake on any general principle, but you see there's a single move here, which is kind of instructive. And you know, if you're playing these rook endgames, white is playing for a win, obviously, and you just have to keep poking and prodding and moving your rook around, which I think he did really an excellent job. But then you have to recognize these moments when your opponent has made a mistake and you can break through. And this is one of those moments. And white can play the move f5 here. And it's just because of this one move that you know, it was a mistake for me to move my rook away. If we back up, instead of rook f2, there's lots of different moves I could try here. I could push the b pawn. I could move my king. Probably getting the king away from the check is a good idea. The king could go either to d6 or to f6. All these moves will keep the draw in hand. But rook f2, which seemed logical to me, going after the undefended f-pawn, fails to this move f5 check. And now what can I do about this? I mean, my intention was to take this guy, but if I take, this is a key point. The key variation is that I'm losing this king and pawn endgame. It's his move here. And of course you have to recognize that white has a one king and pawn endgame here. I try to get in front of the pawn. He can just go over here and take my pawn. I do manage to get in front of the pawn, but then he steps in front of the pawn and he's got even one square between him and the pawn, so that's an easily winning king and pawn endgame. So that's a key variation. But if I don't take that pawn, then I have to move my king. And he can grab here, and he's now 2 pawns up, and I still can't take this pawn because after the exchanges, it's still a winning king and pawn endgame for white. So that was just one key moment in the game that he missed. He played king e3 here. So let's go on, and now it's in the range of about even up to move 51. So like I said, white is kind of poking and prodding, and I'm trying to stay active with my rook and keep him from making progress. And on move 51, he was attacking my rook, and I played the move rook f1. Let's see, he played, he played rook to d5 check right here. I take the pawn. Seemed like that was the logical thing to do. I was maneuvering to take that pawn, obviously, but it's a mistake because my king gets cut off in a way. The rook is preventing my king from coming forward down the board to stop this pawn. And so a very nice demonstration of technique. But to say how I could have continued the draw, after rook takes d5 check, just stepping back with the king. I like this king e6 move, hitting his rook. He takes my pawn, I take his pawn, and now this is a perfect setup for a draw. My rook has his king cut off. My king is going to be able to come over and get in front of the pawn. Well, I'll at least get one step closer. He can't immediately cut me off. So that is a good position for me. Yeah, let's see, what's his best try here? Rook a5. Just thinking, yeah, so I'm going to get in front of the pawn, and I have his king cut off, so I should be able to hold that draw. Let's see, he played, I played king takes f4. And now he's just winning from this point on, and he does a nice job. First he rounds up this pawn, but notice his rook is still keeping my king cut off. I try to get over here, closer to the pawn. He brings his king in. I go rook b1 check, trying to harass him. King c4, and my king still can't make any progress. Let's see. I could have tried, instead of that rook b1 check, you might think I could try bringing my king one step forward. Notice these squares are off limits. But the problem with this move is that, oh, he can deliver the check. I was thinking even pushing the pawn forward would win, but that's not so clear. Oh, it's this check forcing my king away. And now my king is cut off in this direction from the pawn. So that's a key variation. That's how he keeps my king out of the picture. Anyway, I tried the move rook to b1 check here. And he just goes king c4, defending his rook. So once again, his king is in front of the pawn. This is a winning king and pawn endgame. So I go rook back to c1. He brings his rook over to h5, still keeping my king cut off. Notice my king can't cross this line. I try rook d1. He goes king to c5, stepping forward. Let's see, I go king d3. I'm just kind of running, cancel that. King d3, hitting the pawn. He goes rook to d5 check, driving my king back. And this is now a winning king and pawn endgame. I just go here to defend the rook, but there's no stopping the pawn at this point, and he goes on to win. Well, I resigned at this point. But anyway, pretty interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.